Trip inspection. This is the first thing you do for your pre-trip inspection is walking up to the vehicle. The first thing you want to do is say the phrase that pays. The phrase that pays is your cracked, damaged, or loose. You want to say properly mounted and secured. You want to make sure everything is not cracked, bent, or broken. No abrasions, bumps, cuts, or dry rot. All right? This is a 2013 Freightliner Cascadia. The first thing you want to do when you walk up to your vehicle is to check for any fluids. You have 5 major fluids. You have your oil, your diesel, your windshield wiper, your power steering, and your coolant, or which is your radiator fluid. You want to make sure it's not leaking. You also want to make sure your vehicle is not leaning. It indicates a low shift, your freight have shifted in the trailer, low tire pressure, or even a flat tire. You want to make sure your truck is very even. Then you want to come up and you want to check your clearance lights. You have 5 clearance lights, the 3 in the middle are your ID lights. You want to make sure they amber in color. Make sure it's not cracked, bent, or broken, or damaged in any way. Make sure your nuts and bolts are secured. Make sure they're not loose. Make sure they're properly tightened. Make sure everything is properly mounted and secured. Then you come down to your windshield. You have a driver's side and the passenger side, or you might want to indicate this as your left side windshield and your right side windshield. Make sure it's not cracked, damaged, or broken in any way. You want to make sure it's very clean, it's clear and visible, no illegal stickers on either side. You want to also check your weather stripping. You want to check your weather stripping for any abrasions, bumps, or cuts, or dry rotting, and make sure everything is properly mounted and secured. You want to come down to your fender mirrors. These are your fender mirrors. I will check my left side as I'm showing you on my right side. All right, you want to make sure your glass of your mirror is not cracked, bent, or broken, or damaged. You want to make sure all your nuts and bolts are present and tight. All right, then you come down here to your headlight assembly. You will examine your left side headlight assembly as I'm showing you on the right side of the headlight assembly. The center part is your high beam. This is your low beam. You want to make sure both bulbs are present, it's clear in color, make sure it's properly mounted and secured. Make sure your glass around the headlight assembly is not cracked as well. You have a bulb up here, this is your marker light. Make sure it's amber in color. It has 3 functions. It has your running light, your turn signal, and your 4-way flasher. You want to make sure it's properly mounted and secured. This right here is your reflector of the headlight assembly. Make sure everything is properly mounted, secured, nice and tight. Make sure your headlight is clean and clear. Then you want to come check your grill. This is your grill, your bumper, and your license plate. Make sure all nuts and bolts are present and tight. Make sure your grill is not cracked, bent, or broken. Make sure your tag is clear and visible for DOT or your purposes. And check your registration in the left-hand corner of your windshield. Make sure it's up to date. And that would include the outside of the vehicle. Now we're going to go to the engine compartment. We're going to come around to the passenger side of the vehicle. And what you want to do, you want to do a general overview of the vehicle. You want to check for all your hoses for any abrasions, bumps, or cuts, or dry rot. Make sure everything is properly mounted secure. You want to check for your wires for any scorching or any frays or damages or tears in your wiring. Right here for your AC compartment, AC compressor, or your alternator. All right. First off, we're gonna go with your windshield wiper reservoir. All hoses coming to and from. Make sure they're not leaking. Make sure the reservoir is properly mounted and secured. Make sure you have enough fluid, the proper fluid levels for the manufacturer specs. Make sure your top is hand tight. All right, we're going to come to our exhaust. This is our exhaust system right here. You want to make sure our exhaust system is free of any illegal wells. Make sure all the nuts and bolts are present and tight. Everything is properly mounted and secured. You want to check for any soot trails to indicate a leakness. When you start the vehicle up, you want to make sure it does not have a loud noise that indicates a exhaust leak as well. Then you want to go to your alternator. This is your alternator. Your alternator is properly mounted and secured. Make sure all nuts and bolts are present and tight. Make sure all the wires and stuff are nice and tight. No tape on your wires, no frays or damages. My alternator, it is belt driven. Here it is right here. You want to make sure your belt has no more than 3/4 inches of play. Also, you want to check your belt for any abrasions, bumps, or cuts, or dry rotting. Make sure it's nice and tight. That would include this side of the vehicle. We're going to walk around to the driver's side of the vehicle and finish examining. We're going to examine our frame, our suspension, brake, and our tire system on the other side of the vehicle. All right, on this side, this is the driver's side of the engine. You still want to check for all hoses. Make sure there's no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, or dry rot of any way. And you want to check for any loose wires as well. Here we're going to start from the top. This is our air filter on the inside, our air intake, and our air filter housing. You want to make sure it's free of debris. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured. Make sure all nuts and bolts are present and tight. You want to make sure nothing is cracked, bent, or broken in any way. Now we're going to check our fluid levels. This is our radiator coolant. Want to make sure it's at its proper level by checking this right here. Make sure it's proper level to the factory specs. All hoses coming to and from are not leaking. No abrasions, bumps, or cuts, or dry rotted. Make sure both tops are hand tight. All right. We're going to come down to our power steering reservoir. You want to make sure it's full to the factory specs. All hoses coming to and from are not leaking. No abrasions, bumps, or cuts, or dry rotted. Nothing is cracked, bent, or broken. Make sure all nuts and bolts are present and tight. Make sure the tops on your reservoir is hand tight. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured. Here we're going to go to our fuel filter. Make sure our fuel filter is not leaking. Make sure it's present and tight. Make sure all nuts and bolts are present and tight. Make sure all hoses coming to and from, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, or dry rot. Make sure it's all properly mounted, secured. All right, this is our oil filler right here. This is where you put the oil in. Here's our dipstick. All right, what we do to check our oil, we pull this out, we wipe it off, we put it back in, and we pull it out, make sure it's between the add and the full line at its proper level. Now we're gonna go to our radiator. This is our radiator right here. You wanna make sure our radiator hoses has no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and dry rot, and not leaking. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. We have our fan housing and our fan blades. Make sure they're not damaged. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured. Our fan is belt driven. Here you can see that it's belt driven. You want to make sure the belt has no more than 3/4 inches of play. Make sure it has no abrasion, bumps, or cuts, or dry rot. Here we're going to go to our water pump. This is our water pump right here. Make sure our water pump, all hoses coming to and from, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, or dry rot. Make sure all nuts and bolts are present and tight. Our water pump right here is belt driven. Make sure the belt still has no more than 3/4 inches of play. Also check this belt for any abrasions, bumps, cuts, or dry rot. Make sure it's not torn in any way. Now we're going to come over here and we're going to go to our air compressor. Our air compressor is back here where the hoses go to. Make sure our air compressor is not, make sure it's properly mounted, secured. Make sure it's not leaking. All hoses coming to and from are not damaged in any way. Properly mounted, secured. Make sure nothing is cracked, bent, or broken. Up on our up under our air compressor, we have our power steering pump. If you follow these hoses right here down to the bottom, that's our power steering pump. We want to make sure all hoses coming to and from are not leaking, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, or dry rotted. Our air compressor and our power steering pump are gear driven. You want to make sure you let them know if it's gear driven or belt driven. They are both gear driven. All right, now you want to come over here. We're going to go to our power steering gearbox. It's also gear driven. You want to make sure all nuts and bolts are present and tight. Make sure it's free of any illegal welds. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured. Here we have our steering shaft. No more than 10 degrees of play. Make sure the U-joints on the top and the bottom, make sure they're properly lubed and greased. Make sure all nuts and bolts are present and tight. Properly mounted and secured. Here we're going to go to our frame. This is our frame. Our frame, make sure our frame is free of any illegal welds. Properly mounted and secured. Make sure all nuts and bolts are present and tight. Also on our frame, we have our shock. Make sure our shock is not leaking, free of any illegal welds. Make sure it's also properly mounted and secured. Make sure all nuts and bolts are present and tight and not leaking. On our shock at the very bottom, we have our leaf spring. Here's our leaf spring right here. Make sure it's in line with each other. Make sure it's not cracked, bent, or broken, free of any illegal welds. Not damage of, damage of anything. Here we have our U-joints. Our U-bolts. These are our U-bolts. I apologize. We have our U-bolts that's mounted on the steering axle that's holding the leaf spring down. We want to make sure all the nuts and bolts are present and tight, not cracked, bent, or broken. Here's our steering axle. You want to make sure our steering axle to go from one side of the tire to the other side of the steer tire. Make sure it's not cracked, bent, or broken, free of any illegal welds, properly mounted and secured. We want to check our leaf spring hangers. We got a leaf spring hanger right here. We want to check our leaf spring hanger and our leaf spring mount, front and back. Make sure all nuts and bolts are present and tight. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured. On our hanger right here, We have a rubber bushing. We want to make sure no abrasions, bumps, cuts, or dry rot on our rubber bushing. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured, and tight. Now we're going to go with our 3-piece steering linkage. We have our pitman arm right here, our drag link, and our control arm right here. They're locked in by castle nuts and carter pins, top and bottom. You want to make sure all nuts and bolts are present and tight, free of any illegal welds, not cracked, bent, or broken. Make sure everything is properly mounted and secured. Here on the bottom, on our lower control arm, we have our tie rod. Our tie rod is also locked in with a castle nut and a carter key right here. You want to make sure all nuts and bolts are present and tight, properly mounted and secured. Check the bolts on your tie rod as well. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured. Okay, now we're going to go with our brake chamber. This is our brake chamber right here, single brake chamber. We have our air line and we have our ABS line. Make sure the air lines and ABS line, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, or dry rot, and no tears. Make sure it's not leaking. Make sure it's properly secured to your brake chamber. The brake chamber is mounted onto the S-cam bracket. Make sure your S-cam bracket is free of any illegal welds, not cracked, bent, or broken. Make sure the nuts and bolts are present and tight. Here we have our slack adjuster and our push rod right here. It's locked in with clevis pins and carter pins, and you should not have no more than 1 inch of play with the brakes release. Make sure everything is free of any illegal welds. Make sure it's not cracked, bent, or broken in any way, properly mounted, secured. Here we have our brake chamber. I'm sorry, our brake pads. Our brake drums right here. Here we have our brake drums. Here's our brake pads right here, and these are our brake drums. You want to make sure your brake drums is free of any illegal welds. Make sure it's not cracked, bent, or broken, or damaged in any way. You want to make sure your brake drums do not have no more than 1 inch of heat stretch. On our brake pads, you want to make sure it's free of any illegal welds as well. Make sure it's not cracked, bent, or broken, or damaged. Your brake pads should not have no less than 1/4 or 1/4 inch of thickness. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured. Now you want to go to your rim. Check the inside of your rim as well as the outside of your rim. Make sure it's free of any illegal welds. Make sure it's not cracked, bent, or broken, or damaged in any way. You want to check the tire. You want to make sure your tire is beaded on the inside and the outside of your rim. Make sure it's properly seated and beaded to the rim. You want to check the outside of your tire as well as the inside of the tire and the top of your tire for any abrasions, bumps, cuts, or dry rotting. No knots or bulges coming out the tire. You want to make sure the top of your tire has even wear around the top. You have to have virgin radios, matching set tires on the front steer axle. No less than 4/32 of tire depth. And the tire pressure needs to be at least 100 PSI or the factory specs. All right. Then you want to go down here to your lug nuts. You want to make sure all your lug nuts are present and tight, nothing is missing. You checking for any rust trails or shiny metal that indicates looseness. All right, make sure they all properly mounted, secured. And there, here you have your hub seal. Make sure all your nuts and bolts on your hub seal is present and tight. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured. This is make sure your rubber bushing on here, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, or dry. Make sure it's not leaking. Here you have your valve stem. You want to make sure your valve stem is present and tight. Make sure it's the top on your valve stem. Make sure it's not cracked, bent, or broken, or damaged in any way. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured. And that would include your pre-trip inspection on Section A.